Hi, everybody. Did you know that the average Canadian household throws out an astronomical $3,872 of food every year? At a time when food insecurity is at its peak across Canada, it has never been more important to take a close, calculated look at food loss and waste in this country. My name is Audrey Manuel from Circular Innovation Council, a national not-for-profit and charity organization, and I'm your host of today's discussion about Canadian food loss and waste. Joining me today are Catherine Tays, PhD in microbiology and biotechnology with Canadian Standards Association, or CSA Group, and Maggie Bain, project manager with Circular Innovation Council, who are subject matter experts in the areas of food loss and waste. Today, we'll be discussing frontier research in the Canadian circular economy. Food insecurity is just one problem that the circular economy aims to fix. A circular economy is a way of life that deviates from the linear take, make, waste model of consumption that keeps goods in use and out of the landfill. We'll explore how a circular economy is a solution to the food loss and waste problem from a standards perspective and a boots on the ground perspective. But first, let's talk about the latest food loss and waste research with Catherine. The work of Canadian Standards Association, commonly known as CSA Group, involves developing standards that are critical to enabling and supporting the transition to circularity in Canada. So, Catherine, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Catherine. I'm a Strategic Initiatives Manager for Emerging Programs at CSA Group. I'm very happy to be here to discuss our recent food loss and waste report, as I've always had a passion for sustainability and circularity since my PhD research, where I worked on the biotransformation of greenhouse gas into biodegradable bioplastics. In my current role, I help identify areas and ways in which standards can play a role in supporting and advancing the sectors of agriculture and agri-food, as well as transit and passenger rail. So this involves supporting CSA's work in sustainable agriculture, agricultural data and reporting, as well as food loss and waste, and more. I've also previously worked in energy systems transition, research program management, and science communications and engagement.
Well, thanks for that. So before we dive into the research, can you tell me why standards are important?
Yeah, absolutely. In a nutshell, standards are documents that provide minimum requirements for use or safety, performance, design of products or services. They're non-biased, trusted documents that are developed by groups of technical subject matter experts with balanced representation across interest groups, anyone who might be affected by or use a standard. We follow a robust, accredited, and consensus-based process, and our standards that we produce are living documents, meaning that they're regularly updated to reflect best new practices and technologies. Standards are valuable as tools because they can provide recognized benchmarks, they can demonstrate good practice, both for established processes or emerging supporting innovation. They provide consistency, clarity, and transparency. When we're thinking about the circular economy, like with food loss and waste, we recognize that there are changes being implemented across the entire value chain, and this can affect quality, performance, and consistency and clarity are critical to enable organizations to actually develop these new business models. And so that's where we think standards will be needed and can play a role in helping provide that clarity.
Thanks for that overview. Okay, so what was the research about that was done recently?
Yeah, so this research focused on opening the black box, so to speak, of industrial, commercial, and institutional food loss and waste. It was really designed to dive into what's currently being done in Canada in terms of data and reporting, and then also what could be done to improve the availability and application of this data in the future. The reason that we wanted to look into this is that food loss and waste is not uniformly measured across the country. There's many organizations doing really great work, but we don't have a confident baseline for how much food is currently being wasted and how much could be diverted or upcycled, because there can be differences in the way that things are measured. It's really incredibly challenging to tackle a topic and find solutions when you don't even really have a good idea of the scale of the problem to begin with.
Yeah, it's difficult to solve a problem when there are so many variables and different ways of doing things. It sounds like standardizing measurement methods is the first step towards gaining a baseline across the country. What aspect of food loss and waste did the research focus on?
So this research approached the question from a primarily municipal lens, acknowledging that much of the current food loss and waste data and reporting in Canada, though primarily residential, is being generated within municipalities. As leaders in food loss and waste reporting, and as the level of government really closest to the communities where this food loss and waste is happening, we wanted to ask the question of what data and tracking metrics and practices municipalities are currently engaging in, and what might help them meet their goals going forward.
Were any recommendations drawn from the research?
This research drew from and expanded on a database of over 600 data points on IC&I waste to find what data was being collected and how. It reviewed the methodologies by which this data was collected and weighed relative benefits and drawbacks, resulting in recommendations on how food loss and waste data could best be measured to ensure technical accuracy, but also practical feasibility. A standard method of measuring was recommended to ensure comparability and interoperability of the data that is collected. To get to the heart of the matter, direct measurement, while more labor intensive, was found to be most optimal to capture both volume and the type of waste, which is both useful pieces of information for organizations and regulators alike. And this is opposed to, potentially mass balance methods, which are less intensive but also less precise.
Great, thanks for your answer. So, Maggie, could you introduce yourself and tell us about the kinds of food loss and waste pilot programs you're running?
Sure. So I'm Maggie Bain. I'm the project manager at Circular Innovation Council, where I lead research and implement regional pilot programs across Canada. And those programs focus on mostly building circular systems for end management of food and organic waste in the IC&I sector. So these pilots are really about helping food generating businesses. That's everyone from restaurants to hospitals, grocery stores, small cafes, food processors, anyone who's generating food, and helping them divert food and organic materials away from landfill, so that material doesn't decompose and generate really potent greenhouse gas emissions. So through the pilots, we aim to redirect that food back into the system, either as surplus edible food that can be rescued and redistributed, or as organic waste that can be turned into compost or bioenergy, which helps curb those greenhouse gas emissions, but also it helps recover valuable resources for inputs back into food systems. So on the pilots, what makes them unique is that they're place-based. So we go out and we partner with a municipality, usually a town or a city, and we tailor the pilot model to the local context of what types or sizes of businesses exist there, what the waste and climate goals of the local government are, as well as being flexible to existing service provider market conditions and infrastructure availability for processing and collection, including facilities for compost, bioenergy, and food rescue organizations. And one of the main goals is to make food waste diversion as financially accessible and logistically simple as possible for the IC&I sector. But we're not just focusing on operations of diverting food waste. We're also testing out smart tools for collecting data from those pilot regions, like volumetric bin sensors that help track how much food waste is actually being sourced, separated, and diverted by the ICI sector in those regions. And, like Catherine said, this information is very valuable. It can give both businesses that are diverting and municipalities that we're partnered with better information about their internal operations of food waste diversion, as well as broader sector-wide data for more informed policy and infrastructure design, which helps propel diversion systems forward on a larger scale.
Awesome. Can you walk me through what a direct measurement looks like in one of these pilot programs?
Sure, yeah. So it depends sometimes on what we're trying to measure, but often the key metrics we're tracking are weight-based. So kilograms of surplus food donated back to the community, and tonnage of organic waste diverted to compost per business in the pilot. The surplus food data tracking is usually done by our food rescue organization partners, and we have an agreement, data sharing agreement with them. So this would be organizations like Second Harvest or Leftovers Foundation. And this involves the business reporting in the weight and type of food they're donating, which is then validated on site by personnel from the food rescue organizations collecting the donations. And for tracking organic materials that go into the bins, like food scraps, or other organic items that go into those compost bins for collection, we combine a few methods together. So usually our bins will have a sensor installed on the lid that tells us real time how full the bin is. And then we'll have staff member on the ground go out and take manual weights of those bins throughout the pilot period at different time points. And this allows us to calculate a weekly diversion average for each business. And those data points for each business can then be extrapolated out over time since we have their average fill level week by week. Coming up, though, we hope to test some new sensor technology soon that allows for real-time weight data from the bins. So we wouldn't have to have a staff member going out every time to help with the weighing of those carts. So these measurements, both the food rescue measurements and the organic waste, get converted into other useful metrics, like number of meals donated per business, amount of GHG emissions avoided, economic value of the food recovered as donated meals, as well as the value of the new soil products created or bioenergy. Yeah, and this just helps businesses kind of get a baseline of where they're at, and can also be scaled up more broadly for our municipal partners to use.
Great. So why is the pilot program important? How does it impact businesses or residents in Canada?
Sure. So, as we talked about earlier, we don't have exact baselines for this data, but we have a good idea that the ICI sector in Canada generates most of our country's food and organic waste, like around 14 million tons per year. But it's the least supported sector by diversion infrastructure, funding mechanisms, policy frameworks, and data systems for tracking and getting food out of landfill and back into our systems as valuable resources. So this affects businesses, but it doesn't just affect them. It also affects local governments and service providers. They also experience barriers. So, local governments, haulers, organics processors, food rescue services. And because they also experience barriers, it makes it really hard to deliver and support ICI diversion solutions at the same scale that they can for residential organics programs, which are more common. So as a result, many ICI food generators, especially smaller businesses, struggle to adopt circular end management practices of food and organic waste due to cost, space, and capacity constraints. And that leads to those large volumes of waste taking up, or food waste taking up valuable capacity in landfills. So for the pilots, by testing these real world solutions in different regions across Canada, we're helping businesses save money, reduce GHG emissions, and comply with the evolving food waste diversion regulations and mandates that are coming out often before they're put in place by governments, which helps them adjust once they are required to divert. For instance, some provinces and cities now require organic waste diversion or have landfill bans in place for food materials, and more are tending to move in that direction, which is why it's important. For Canadians more broadly, this work supports more circular food systems and brings to the surface the connection between food waste, circular economy, and climate. So less waste going to landfill, more surplus food reaching people who need it, and more climate smart infrastructure and new market opportunities in place. So win across the board for the economy, environment, and communities. A couple more points. We also partner with the municipal government in these regions, like I mentioned, alongside other industry stakeholders to design and implement the pilots. And this creates a network that can hopefully then continue partnerships after the pilot period is completed to be scaled up larger. These networks can help scale the solutions up. They now have connections to share data and infrastructure and enable more evidence-based policy development for waste and climate regulations. And like I mentioned earlier, this data also helps businesses see how much food they're wasting based on their own internal workflow. And it might help them sort out why it's being wasted also, and if there's internal operational changes that could be made to try and help reduce that in the workplace, even something as simple as adjusting inventory practices. But it can also help provide them data for sustainability reporting and goal setting for wasting.
Great, thanks for summarizing the pilots so succinctly for us. Okay, back to you, Catherine. Why is the CSA food loss and waste research important, and to whom? Does this impact businesses or residents in Canada?
Yeah, I think Maggie's points were really relevant as well for the research that we're accomplishing. So I'll keep it short and sweet, but this research is important to municipalities seeking to gather more accurate information on IC&I food loss and waste generation within their own communities. It's also important to organizations within the IC&I space seeking to measure and reduce their own food loss and waste. Last but certainly not least, by enabling the collection of higher quality food loss and waste data, the research recommendations can help support circularity initiatives where the food loss and waste generated within this IC&I sector can become resources for the manufacturing of new products.
Okay, before we discuss how these two initiatives might shape the future, I'd like to take a moment to thank CSA Group for sponsoring this episode and Circular Innovation Council's National Education Campaign, Circular Economy Month. Thanks to their support, we're able to have meaningful dialogue like this and educate Canada about the circular economy, including subtopics like food loss and waste. Okay, back to the podcast. How will the research impact the future of food loss and waste?
Yeah, I think I opened with the concept of the black box for IC&I food loss and waste. And this research demonstrates that it is possible to create and maintain accurate databases of food waste in Canada. And it strongly supports the need for standardization to bring that forward. It demonstrates the broad support for such an effort among municipalities that we talked to in our research, many of which are also targeting food waste reduction as part of their sustainability planning, as well as organizations involved in the food waste value chain, which could be, collectors, upcyclers, et cetera.
Are there plans for future research?
Definitely. As with all questions of data and reporting, there is an important factor of data stewardship. Who can or should serve as the repository for a national food waste database? This could be an important element to help track improvements towards Canada's food waste reduction goals, but it would require maintenance and clarity on how that data would be used. From its bottom-up analysis of IC&I waste audit data, this report provides an estimate of the current overall amount of Canada's IC&I food waste. This is, we feel, a useful companion or comparison piece to the other estimates that are available, some of which have different methodologies. These estimates can vary quite a bit, and it's likely true that the number is between some of these numbers, but without an accurate, uniform measurement standard broadly supported and applied throughout the value chain, it's really hard for us to say for certain. We expect future standards to follow, potentially including more specific guidance for different parts of the agri-food value chain, like different IC&I businesses, on how best to measure, reduce, or direct their food waste. So yes, lots of work ahead.
That's fantastic. Okay, Maggie, how do you see your pilot programs making an impact in the future?
So Catherine touched a lot on this already, but the pilot programs are on the ground examples because they are really important for helping fill that major data gap that we currently have in the CI sector, especially for use of local governments and service providers within the waste industry. So right now, as we've discussed, we have a very limited insight into how much food waste is actually being diverted by businesses, which is what systems like our pilots as well as CSA's work is trying to change. Data and regional learnings are essential for local governments and industry to understand what kinds of infrastructure is needed to handle those materials effectively at the regional level, whether that's composting or bioenergy facilities or food donation networks or other, upcoming B2B circular food solutions. And this benchmarking information is also vital to be able to build out food waste policy and diversion regulations that will ultimately end up shifting the system. So part of what these pilots do is de-risk new models by testing them on the ground. And just as importantly, they generate the data we need to make those models scalable. So it's about building shared solutions between governments, service providers, and the businesses that generate this waste, and aligning those solutions with the real operational on the ground realities for those businesses. Because if we want to meet our climate and waste reduction targets, food waste diversion in the ICI sector most definitely has to be a part of the plan.
Agreed. Well, thank you both for taking the time to be on this podcast today. I appreciate your different perspectives on food loss and waste. If listeners would like more information on the subject matter, they're invited to read about the CSA research online at csagroup.org. You can find information about Circular Innovation Council's commercial food waste diversion program at circularinnovation.ca/food waste pilots. Thanks again.